So what should the Prime Minister be doing to reverse the consumption slowdown that we are dealing with at this time? What should be done to reverse the consumption slowdown? Because at this time, from car sales to two-wheeler sales, tractor sales, everything is coming down. Moped sales came down 9.8% in March and 5.9% in April. Non-oil, non-gold, non-silver imports are coming down. So consumer demand is contracting. I want to go across first this time to Naina Lal Kidwai and understand from her, why do you think this is happening? And if we need to spur consumer demand, what do you believe are the policy interventions the government ought to be doing?
So I did mention putting more money into the rural sector, but I would just add that we have an issue with liquidity and bank finance, which traditionally have been big supporters of these two sectors which you mentioned, the whole auto, two-wheeler area, and consumer durables as well. We need to bring back liquidity into the system, traditionally been there through the NBFCs. There has been a lot of corrective activity that has happened on the NBFC front, and we will see the NBFC regulatory mechanisms now that will be much more akin to banking than they've been. All in the right direction, but I fear it's too much, too fast. And what we've had as a result is money that traditionally went into demand through borrowing by individuals, money which went into the real estate sector, which happened traditionally much more from NBFCs than from banks. All of this is impacting growth. And how the liquidity part of the way banks and RBI manages this going forward is going to be critical, because we all know that there has been a squeeze on that front.
Samiran Chakravarti, why do you believe Indian consumers are putting the brake on their consumption budgets? And what do you believe the government can do to try and reverse that?
So three quick points. So one is there's a slowdown in the rural consumption, there's a slowdown in urban, and there is a slowdown in the government consumption itself because of the election model code of conduct. Out of which the easiest one is the government slowdown part of it. We have already seen significant government consumption or spending after the elections. In 1 week, the government spent more than 60,000 crores. And that's slowly going to trickle through the system and improve the consumption side of it. So we are less worried about that part. The rural consumption part is more a function of food prices. We have seen a significant kind of low food inflation for almost 2 years now, which has started to affect the rural consumption. But at the same time, the wholesale prices of food has moved up quite a lot. So if the actual retail prices start moving up, increasing the income for the farmers, I think that's the time when we will start seeing rural consumption to go up. So for me, the big decision point for the government is how to ensure that the MSP reaches the maximum number of farmers. So the PM Asha scheme announced last year, in this year's main cropping, Kharif cropping season, if PM Asha is fully implemented, I think that will be a big achievement. And quickly on the third one, which is the urban consumption part, we have to understand the importance of the NBFCs that has grown over the years, where they are now almost 1/3 of the total credit in the system. And if the NBFCs are not growing at a significant pace, then it's definitely going to affect urban consumption, because we have to understand that over the last 5 years, almost 10 percentage points of GDP of consumption has taken place out of either increased borrowing or lowering of household savings. So that leveraged consumption, if it stops, then just by job and income growth, it's impossible to sustain the same level of consumption as it was before. So these 3 points on rural, urban, and government consumption, if they are taken on board, then I think we should see better
Rajeev Dubey,
consumption
explain
recovery
to our
in second
viewers
half of the
how a meltdown in the non-banking financial sector can cause consumption to come down, and what do you believe needs to be done to address it?
So what has happened, Rahul, over the past decade or so is that the banks have lent fewer and fewer to the consumers. Instead, consumers have been taking a lot of loan from the NBFC sector. So when NBFC sector gets into trouble, consumption ought to be in trouble. We are 67%, almost 2/3 of our economy is consumption economy in terms of GDP. So when consumption is in trouble, we are in serious trouble. That is why you are seeing that the deceleration has become so accelerated over the past 3 quarters as opposed to the past 4 years. The deceleration is down to 5.8% from, we used to be 8.5%. So the last 3 quarters is this is what has happened. NBFC sector got into serious trouble. It stopped lending. It's about 30 to 40% of total borrowings that the consumers take. So it's enormous. When that got into trouble, the consumption has tanked. Now, how do you get this out of it? Basically, the only thing that you can do as far as the government is concerned is to ensure that some of the GST rates are brought down to lower rates maybe, and also ensure that borrowings by banks can be enhanced by pushing the banks to reduce interest rates. We've been saying, Rahul, that since 2014, when RBI turned its policy parameters, it started reducing policy rates. Since then, 2.25% of policy repo rate has been cut. Banks have only passed on 0.6%. This is criminal. This is criminal. Banks are choking up the economy. We ought to push the banks to reduce the interest rates so that there can be more enhanced borrowings by the consumers as well as by the industry.
Mohan Guruswamy, do you believe that the deceleration in the economy is bottoming out? Do you believe automatically we will see an upward curve from here? What do you believe the government ought to be doing to try and reverse the consumption slowdown?
Well, I think, the consumption will start picking up once capital expenditure picks up. If you look at the capital expenditure GDP graph, it's been steadily dropping since 2012. It's not something which happened during Modi's tenure. It began before that. And for 7 years now, it has been dropping. And unless you get it looking up, then you won't create new consumption. You can't just keep creating consumption by printing more money and giving higher wages as you've been doing so far. Government expenditure, salaries are huge now. They're about 12% of GDP. And you just can't keep giving them more and more money so that they can go and buy more cars and refrigerators. You've got to make investment. You've got to create jobs. Look at the bare facts that, at one time, 60% of India's GDP came from agriculture and 60% of India's labor was in agriculture. Today, India's GDP is much, much bigger, and only 13% of GDP comes from agriculture, and 60% are still employed in agriculture. So you have this huge country sitting in the hinterland, with people are struggling, people have no jobs, people have no money, and food prices will not go up. Agricultural produce will not go up if you have oversupply now. We're coming to a position where producing more food than we need. Unless you create demand, food prices won't go up. And you've got to incentivize investment by private sector for people to feel buoyant about the economy, about the state, that we can invest money and make profits out of it. A little bit of inflation is okay. But, you can't have consumption-led growth forever. You've got to have expenditure-led growth forever. Capital expenditure. You can't have revenue expenditure-led growth.
Meghnad Desai, the Modi Sarkar will say they spent the last 5 years trying to get private sector to start investing once again in the India story. To a great extent, that didn't happen. We saw unutilized capacity levels come down, but not so much, which would spur further private investment. What do you believe the government ought to do at this time to spur consumption and to reverse this decline in consumers just going out and buying different things?
I think, first of all, again and again I have to keep on saying that in the last 5 years, the economy did grow at 7%, and that is actually quite a high rate of growth. It's also difficult to maintain it stable at that rate, and I welcome that. I think every time consumption goes down, you don't have to rush in to reflect the economy. I quite agree with Guruswamy that, we really have to understand that India needs investment for growth. It needs a good fiscal discipline for growth. And I think more than anything else, it needs to clean up the financial markets. I think the cost of credit is high in India because the financial markets have been very badly run. The public sector banks have been dreadful. It's very, very bad governance, so we have a lot of NPAs. And although the government is trying through the insolvency and bankruptcy code to sort it out, it has got to do much more. And the NBFC sector is another problem. So I think we need to clear up the private sector, the credit availability and the cost of credit, because right now India cannot afford such a delicate and crisis-oriented financial sector as it has been. So I think the first priority for the government should be reform of the financial sector. It should also make quite sure in the budget that it is not going to go after a spending spree, because I think that will be very fatal to the prospect for the economy. It would affect the inflow of foreign direct investment. And I think, more than that, I want to actually urge that growth in economies is caused not by governments, but by what people do. It is hundreds and thousands of people's private decisions to consume, to invest, and so on. So government should not rush into trying. I think, for example, the quarter before the election had a lot of uncertainty, so many people may have put off consumption plans just for that reason. So we have to factor in that there may be uncertainty in the quarter where consumption was falling, and let's see if something recovers naturally. Because we believe too much in government. We actually believe that governments cause growth. Governments don't cause growth. People cause growth. People have to have confidence in the future. They have to have a confidence that they'll be able to make profit if they're a business or get a job if they're people. And the government has just to be the guidance, like the traffic policeman, basically guide the economy properly.